Question number 4, Dr. Russell Norman. Dr. Russell Norman.
E te mangai o te whare tēnā koe. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he stand by his answer to written question 07314-2013 when he said, and I quote, "The inquiry team itself did not seek permission from Peter Dunn before it obtained his email logs," end quote, and does he think it should have?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in answer to the first part of the question, yes. In answer to the second part, no.
Supplementary.
Dr. Russell Norman, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Did the Henry inquiry get written consent from Peter Dunn before obtaining his parliamentary email logs? And for the purposes of clarity, we're talking about his parliamentary email logs, not his ministerial email logs.
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
I need to check, Mr. Speaker, but to the best of my knowledge, no.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Did Mr. Dunn agree to cooperate with the Henry inquiry by agreeing for it to access his parliamentary email logs, and what evidence does he have of that agreement?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what is quite clear is Mr. Dunn actually didn't agree to comply with the inquiry because on numerous occasions his office or he was directly asked to release his emails and he refused to do so. In terms of the wider issue of the metadata, what I can say is that the terms of reference for the inquiry on the 15th of April made it quite clear that they would be accessed, and no minister raised any concerns with me about this fact.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
So with regard to the letter in April in which the Prime Minister says some form of consent was obtained, it would appear from his answer, did Mr. Dunn reply to the terms in this letter by agreeing to cooperate with the inquiry by allowing his parliamentary email logs to be accessed by the inquiry?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't have the details of whether Mr. Dunn wrote back or not. The member could put that down right into my office and we'd be able to give him an answer. But I go back to the original point, which is that the terms of reference were quite clear, and they were, and I quote, "Stage 1 will include reviewing communications and copying equipment and records, logbooks and any other material considered relevant of the persons and their officers who had or were likely to have had access to the compliance review report." No minister raised any concerns with me, and in fact, when I announced the inquiry, and Dr. Norman thought it was a member of the National Party that might have leaked it, he was screaming for there to be an inquiry with all access to all information and to get to the bottom of it.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
So is the Prime Minister saying that the extent of the consent obtained by the Henry inquiry, acting under the authority of the Prime Minister's department, the extent of consent obtained was simply that the terms of the inquiry were published and there was no reply from Mr. Dunn agreeing to those terms of inquiry? There was no explicit consent from Mr. Dunn for Mr. Henry to access Mr. Dunn's parliamentary email log?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, all of those can be checked in case there is other correspondence, but I think it was quite clear that if one looks at the terms of reference, what was going to be accessed, as I said, no minister made it clear. But what is becoming increasingly clear, actually, is if the Greens were ever in government with Labor, they're obviously concerned they might do such dodgy things they want nothing looked at.
That's an unnecessary part to the answer. Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Given that Mr. Dunn received the Kittredge report as leader of the United Future Party, not as a minister, given that the emails concerned were parliamentary, not ministerial emails, and given that Mr. Dunn never gave his consent for the Henry inquiry to access his parliamentary email account, under what authority did Mr Henry access Mr Dunn's parliamentary email log?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, in my view, the authority that was vested in him when I asked him to conduct the inquiry, when I made it quite clear that all communications, copying equipment, records and logbooks would be looked at, that no minister raised concerns, and that the member himself went on to say that not only was this a very serious matter, but that if I didn't know who had leaked the report, that I should launch an inquiry and get to the bottom of it, and that fundamentally I should leave no stone unturned to get an answer.
Entry.
Supplementary question, Dr Russell Norman. Order. Order. Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So is the Prime Minister saying that the authority of the Department of Prime Minister, which was the sole authority that the Henry inquiry had, is sufficient authority to access the parliamentary server and parliamentary emails without the consent of the Member of Parliament concerned?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I think this is going to come as a shock to the member, but when a parliamentary inquiry of this nature is established for very, very good reasons, a ministerial inquiry is established for very good reasons, then actually there is a responsibility to try and get to the bottom of that. And in fact, as I've just tried to point out, with what the member himself was saying when he thought it was a National Party member, he was quite happy for all information to be accessed. No minister or no staff member at any time at the moment that we actually went out there and put out the terms of reference ever came and complained was upset by that.
Supplementary question, Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So the Prime Minister is now giving himself the authority and his staff, the Henry inquiry, appointed by the Department of Prime Minister and only with the authority of the Department of Prime Minister, the right to access Members of Parliament's parliamentary emails and parliamentary email logs without first obtaining the consent of those Members of Parliament.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, no, the member's not correct. Actually, no emails have actually been looked at. What has been established was an inquiry with terms of reference which made it quite clear that communications, logbooks and records and other material considered relevant would be reviewed. And I think, as I've said earlier, the member would be, because he was already one of the first to be out of the blocks, claiming that this was a serious matter, that I needed to find out who leaked the report, that I should, quote, get to the bottom of it, all of those things. But today, all of a sudden, he doesn't like it.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Did his office request the email metadata from parliamentary services that identified that there were 86 emails between Peter Dunn and a journalist discussing the Kitteridge report?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, no, that was done by Mr Henry as he conducted the report.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Is it correct that his office became aware of 86 emails between Mr Dunn and a journalist discussing the Kitteridge report on the 22nd of May? And why did he come to this House on the 29th of May and say he didn't believe for a moment that any of his ministers were involved in leaking the report?
Right Honourable Prime
Mr.
Minister.
Speaker, because, well, in relation to the first bit, that's probably correct. That probably is the right date, although I don't have that with me. I'd have to check it, and the member's often wrong. In relation to the 29th, because that's what I believe to be correct.
Question number 5, Simon O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Transport and asks,